Hello and welcome to the Marble Arch Caves. We are putting on some experiments this year as part of the NI Science Festival 2021 in order to bring the caves to you. So this is experiment 1 of 3 and it involves making our own stalactites. So before we get started, all the reference materials, including the lesson outline, results sheets and experiment cards, are available on our website www.marblearchcaves.co.uk. So, as you may already know, the Marble Arch Caves are home to an array of fantastic formations. So these formations are made from calcium carbonate, a mineral that dissolves in water. And today we are going to show you how minerals, such as this, can dissolve in water and then come out of the water to form fantastic formations. So, within the cave there are stalactites. We know this is a stalactite because it would have held on tight to the ceiling. Now, stalactites are made from a mineral called calcium carbonate. That calcium carbonate comes from the rock, limestone rock, and is carried down by the water passing through the cracks in the limestone rock into the cave. When the water drips from the ceiling, it leaves a tiny amount of the limestone behind, and that builds up in microscopic crystals to form a stalactite. If you look at the inside of the stalactite, you can see these layers. They look like the pattern inside wood if you cut it in half. So this wood grain pattern comes from the stalactite growing from the inside out, just like a tree. It grows very, very slowly because the calcium carbonate is deposited very, very slowly. So we will be using a different mineral instead, called Epsom salt. So what you'll need to grow your own stalactites is, first off, a safe place to grow them. We'll need to put all of our equipment in here to keep it together because stalactites can be very fragile, and if we need to move it, we need to be able to move it all at once. Next we have some kitchen foil. We will use this to put a layer along the bottom of the tin so the stalactites don't stick to the bottom of the tin. We have some jars for our solution of Epsom salt and hot water. We'll be working with hot water, so we need a jar to pour it and we need a stirring spatula to stir it. We have some wool here, some fibres. This needs to be absorbent because the water needs to be sucked up along the wool. You can also use hessian cord as a plant-based alternative. We have a jam jar lid. We'll be growing our stalactite in this, and after we're done, it might be a nice base to display it on. And we have some nuts and bolts. We will use these. Maybe a bit of that in it. We'll tie these to the cords in order to weigh them down and keep them in the jars. And lastly, a pair of scissors. So first off, we get our aluminium tray. You can use any tray or plate, but we're recycling this old food container here. The next step is to position your jars. Now you can use pretty much any size of jar. I wonder if any size works better. Might be an interesting experiment. But for the moment, it might look a bit better. We're going to use 2 jars that are pretty much the same. Okay, and you position them in the tray. So the next thing we will need is some hot water. Now make sure you have adult supervision for this. Adult's job to get the hot water. It should be hot, but not boiling. We find it works better if it's quite hot, but not actually boiled. Right. We'll have to be very careful with that for the rest of the session. The next step is to carefully add the hot water to the jars. Try not to spill any. So we've measured the water into the jars, and now we add Epsom salt to the jars. You could try other solutes if you want, other minerals, but we add one teaspoon at a time, just so we know how much we put in. Stirring stick. Stir them after each teaspoon so that you can make sure everything is dissolved. Let's see, it's all disappeared. So since the water can hold more Epsom salt dissolved in it when it's hot, as it cools, it will make crystals much more quickly. If it holds as much as it can when it's hot, it'll drop some just as it cools. That's why we need to make sure it's saturated. So everything is in position now. So we need something for our stalactite to grow on. Stalactites grow down, so they can't grow straight up out of that or we get stalagmites. We need a framework, and we're going to use a natural fibre like wool. This is important because if you use a plastic-based thread, it won't absorb the water and you won't get any stalactites. So first things first, we need to cut our wool to length. Simple enough. About that long, there we go. Next, we need to be able to keep the wool in each of the jars. So we have a little bag of nuts and bolts here, a jar of nuts and bolts. We get 2 bolts out, and we are going to tie one to each end of the string. The next step that I like to do is to give it a bit of a head start. We dip the wool in one of the jars just to get the water on it already. There we go. Next we put our jam jar lid in the middle, and we put the bolts down into the bottom. Now, my string's a little bit long, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to roll it up around one of my bolts to get a slightly shorter length. Now I need to make sure that this hangs down lower than the water level in both of the jars. So I'm going to get a nice low angle there, and you can see that the water will flow downhill and drip from the string. So, as you can see, if you've done it right, you should be able to see drips within a few minutes starting on the string, and it should continue until a stalactite forms. So you want to find somewhere safe to put this where it won't get knocked, and leave it there and check it every day for about a week, and you should be able to see the stalactite growing very, very slowly from the string. So, as you can see, we have found a place that is not going to get knocked about, a safe place for stalactites to grow. We took a picture almost every day. It's hard to be 100% accurate on that. And you can see that it is growing actually very quickly compared to natural stalactites. Now, if you're lucky, you may see a stalagmite growing on the jam jar lid as the stalactite grows. The stalagmite will grow beneath the stalactite. And eventually, if you leave it long enough, they may meet in the middle, and we call this type of formation a column. So, as it drips, you should be checking on it every day, and as you're checking on it, if you notice that the crystals are forming in the jars instead of on the string, that might be because it needs a bit of a stir to get the Epsom salt dissolved again, because it can't get onto the string unless the salt is dissolved in the water. So if it comes out of solution into the jar, we'll give it a bit of a stir. If no crystals are forming anywhere, that might be because there's not quite enough salt in the jar. So if you add a couple of spoonfuls and give it another stir, you should get more crystals forming. So that is how we conducted our experiment. You don't have to do everything exactly the same. You might want to play about with it a little bit. You might want to try adding a bit of food colouring to get crazy coloured formations. I wonder what happens if you put two different colours in each pot. You might want to experiment with where you leave the overall experiment. If it's in a breezy place, will it dry out better? If it's in a warm place, will the crystals look different? I don't know. It's up to you to find out. There are many questions you could ask yourself. If you come up with any, feel free to try them out. We would be very interested in seeing your results. So if you want to find our Facebook page at Marble Arch Caves, with a capital M, you can share any pictures of the final stalactites, stalagmites, cave columns, whatever you wind up with, and we'll be very happy to see everyone's finished projects. And don't forget, have fun. There are also 2 other experiments in this series to try out, so when you're done with this, you can have a look at them.